And 1 week after the devastating magnitude 7-point earthquake that struck northern Syria and neighbouring Turkey, the UN has acknowledged what it says was an international failure to help thousands of quake victims. More ABC News at 6.
G'day, this is Josh Zepps, the host of Afternoons with Josh Zepps, obviously. And you know what's on this Sunday? It's Mardi Gras Fair Day, and I will be in the thick of it, broadcasting into the weekend's show from the fair, bringing you all the outdoor fun. Don't miss it, Sunday from 10 a.m. to midday with me, Josh Zepps, the host of Afternoons with Josh Zepps, live from Fair Day this Sunday.
Celebrate Sydney World Pride 2023.
ABC Radio Sydney.
Now, what did you change your mind about? Pauline in Warriewood says, I used to believe that it was a woman's choice to have an abortion. Now I believe the vulnerable baby needs someone to advocate on their behalf for their human rights. That's Pauline in Warriewood. She's changed that way around. Which way have you changed? Have you reconsidered a view that you had 10 or 15 years ago? What was the view and how have you changed it? 1300 222 702 and on the text, on the phone line 1300 222 702 and on the text 0467 922 702. Tom Saunders is here with the weather. Good afternoon.
Hey, Richie, good afternoon.
Yeah, today and then onwards.
Well, it was cooler today compared to the weekend. We got up to the high 30s actually on Saturday in the western suburbs. It was the warmest weather in more than 12 months for those parts of Sydney. Then we had a southerly change yesterday. So today, the city 25.5, and that's pretty much bang on the average. I've had a couple of showers around today, but not too much. Now, tomorrow, Richard, will be the wettest day of the week. It will be cloudy in Sydney. There's a high chance of showers for most suburbs. There's even the slight chance of a thunderstorm. Some coastal areas could see up to about 10 millimetres of rain and probably closer to up to around 5 millimetres for the west. 25 is the forecast maximum in the city, 22 for Bondi and Penrith 24. So most suburbs a few degrees below average tomorrow.
Okay, and then Wednesday.
So Wednesday, it's partly cloudy. There's still the slight chance of a shower, 26 degrees. Now, that's the end of the cloud for the week. We go to sunny conditions by Thursday, and as the winds swing back around to the north, it's going to warm up. So 28 for Thursday, 30 for Friday, 32 degrees on Saturday, and for the western suburbs, during the weekend, we'll even be climbing as hot as 39 degrees.
Wow, okay, so that would be the hottest of the year so far, would it?
It would be the hottest of the year. It would be the hottest in more than 12 months.
Yeah.
So Penrith got to 38 point something on Saturday. 39 degrees would make it back to late 2021.
Well, there was that day when it was the hottest day. Penrith was the hottest temperature in the world, wasn't it? It got up to 49 or 50.
Yeah, was that a few years ago now?
A few years ago,
that was.
yeah.
Absolutely. I don't think it'll quite be the hottest in the world, but it'll be close.
But it's going to be hot. All right. We'll see you on the telly.
Cheers.
There's Tom Saunders. The Monday Political Forum, Catherine Greiner, board member and former City of Sydney councillor. She's with me in the studio. Catherine, good afternoon.
How are you, Richard?
And there together in the Canberra studio, Susan Templeman, Federal Labor MP for Macquarie. Hi, Susan.
Hello, great to be with you.
And on the other side of the ABC booth, it's Zali Steggall, the Federal Independent MP for Warringah. Hi, Zali.
Richard, that's a Freudian slip. You've done that nearly every time I've
I
come
know.
on this program.
I've got a problem.
Independent.
I know.
Think
I know.
independent.
No, it's just Warringah and Tony and I've got a blockage.
I will send you some turquoise paraphernalia.
Maybe
to
I
put
wear.
around the studio.
I will promise to wear teal when I'm interviewing you.
There you go.
I'll then remember. Now, both Labor and the Coalition have schemes offering relief to heavy users of Sydney's toll road network. Labor's pleading to cap the weekly toll bill at, promising to cap the weekly toll bill at $60 per motorist, while also continuing the government scheme, which allows drivers to claim back 40% of their tolls once they spend $375 in a year. It's true that our road system, free roads to some places, toll roads to others, punishes some motorists more than others. But is people paying people's tolls using taxpayers' money really the best answer to this? Susan Teppelman.
Well, I think the answer is definitely we'd all rather not have toll roads. Certainly those of us who live in Western Sydney and beyond, the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury. Do you know, Blue Mountains people spend on average about $10 each way to get to Sydney on the tolls, but from the Hawkesbury it can be anything from $20 to $28 depending, that's one way depending on where you're going. So it really hurts the hip pocket to have these tolls, and I think having roads built by government, I remember when we used to just toll them for a short time to cover the cost of them, rather than have them tolled ad infinitum, would be a much better approach. But, privatised roads is what's got us to this situation, and that's the problem. Having said that, people really need the toll relief. It is a huge burden for people who have no decent public transport to get from those sometimes difficult places. And I think particularly the cap that Labor's suggesting of $20 per motorist a week, that will be very, very welcome.
Can we afford to build these things? Because no one would want life in Sydney without, I don't know, the M5. I don't think. Can we afford to build them though if we don't have some private money in them?
Well, I think we look at how the Sydney Harbour Bridge was built. There were ways of raising funds from a variety of sources. Now, I remember first living in the mountains and the M4 being built, and we understood that we had to pay a toll and that we were asked to pay a toll for a certain number of years. That toll then came off it because the road was built and the funding had been presumably paid back, as it were. But then not long after, we had the toll put back on it. So Western Sydney in particular has just been an easy target. Government wants to raise some money, let's slap a toll on them. It's time that stopped.
Mind you, with the Harbour Bridge, didn't Lang borrow the money from the POMs and then refuse to give it back? Maybe that's a model.
It certainly worked for the bridge, didn't it?
Exactly. Catherine Greiner, both parties have got a measure of paying back with taxpayer money people who are really suffering from I understand the pain, but is that fair on other motorists or other taxpayers who maybe use public transport and don't drive?
No, I understand Susan's point very well. I think particularly parts of the Western Sydney, say around the Hawkesbury-Richmond area, which is not serviced by good public transport. I think she's got a very valid point. I do remind you, Susan, that of course we did pay the toll on the Harbour Bridge, and as soon as we stopped, we actually paid off the bridge. 50 years later, we took the toll away. But I think the point...
But then we put it back when we built the tunnel, right?
Yes, but that was the point. You can't have all of these access roads, for want of a better word, rather than call them toll. These are access roads that get us across and around the city in a much faster way than you and I would have known growing up. So we haven't taken away the Hume Highway. We haven't taken away the Great Western Highway. There are choices that people can use. I think the cashback needs to be far more focused on those young families who are doing it very tough. But it's a very Sydney-centric. What happens if you live in Dubbo? Why should the taxpayer of Dubbo and Orange and Armidale and Wagga pay for
I suppose
Western Sydney?
because we the taxpayer bought them their roads and didn't build toll roads there. We built normal roads.
Well, there was an argument, I think, for the government of the day, whatever the government of the day, to do that. They had to create access roads. So they had to create roads. What we now have worked out is that if we want to get to where we want to go faster, and it now only takes me from Paddington to Campbelltown 35 to 40 minutes, as opposed to an hour and a half in the old days, let alone driving to Canberra, which is not a toll road after you leave the city environs, but it's double lane all the way. So we remember the days when it would be a 4 or 5 hour drive. Now it's a 3 hour door to door.
You go through Bass Hill, right, and to go to Canberra or Melbourne or whatever, and you go through Bass Hill and there'd be sort of, I don't know, 20 sets of lights.
Yes, easily. So we've cut out all of that, which I think is better for the running of the car. It's better for the environment, and it also makes obviously for a faster trip. Now, obviously, there are going to be pockets of time, but this concept of the community always is expecting something to come back to it is, I think, a very flawed policy. I feel like I'm the grumpy lady in the corner at the moment over here, but I just think we have to be very careful about that. I love the South Coast. Go down there today. You take the road from Nowra, say, through to Greenwell Point or Culburra, Currarong. The roads are scandalously torn up because of the flooding.
And dangerous because they're single lane.
And it's a really...
one lane in each direction.
And they need government help to get those roads back into condition again.
Zali, how should Sydney deal with this? Because no one wants to have a life as it used to be with the 16 traffic lights to Canberra. But these things cost money. How do you then fund it? And if you fund it through privatisation and tolls, then what do you say to people where the burden is so unfair?
Well, I can assure Catherine, the grumpy lady in the corner is probably me, because the Northern Beaches gets shortchanged when it comes to roads and infrastructure. We still have the Spit Bridge. It's a drawbridge that goes up several times a day. And we don't have any commitment. We have the Coalition has indefinitely shelved the Beaches Link Tunnel, and we have the Labor opposition not supporting it. Now, I don't dispute the business case is a major problem with the Beaches Link Tunnel, as well as the environmental case. But that's that broader problem that if we're always outsourcing infrastructure to a private construction model, the business case will always rely on tolls to make it stack up. We really need to be focusing on public transport, because I agree with your comment that there's a real there's an unfairness about this proposal, that those using their cars are going to get assistance, whereas those doing what I would say is the right thing of using public transport are not. So I would like to see a commensurate reduction when it comes to public transport costs to really incentivise that part of transport. I mean, we really have to go down that road.
Although I suppose a car driver might say, yeah, but public transport is already subsidised in a different way.
Look, I think when you look at the cost of public transport for users across a week of commuting to work, there's a huge amount of cost to the households in that. In that way as well. Public transport is not cheap for commuters. So I think we have to look at it more holistically, and not just maybe in a regional, a particular region that the parties fighting it out for state election are looking at trying to win votes.
Catherine
Well,
Grice?
what I would add, though, Richard,
Susan, yeah.
17 of the top 20 tolled suburbs are in Western Sydney. So Western Sydney's already paying a really disproportionate price for the roads that it uses. So, this one's going to require, I think, a complete change in thinking, and you can see the three of us going, there's got to be a better way.
Well, the unfairness of it is just remarkable, isn't it? What's the sense that if you use the M5, you get cash back, if you use the M4, you don't? Well, I mean, how can that be? I mean, I understand the history of this thing and, the seat that Bob Carr wanted to win in 1923 or something, but still, it's weird.
Yeah, we did get cash back on the M4 at one point, and I don't know how those decisions are made, but, let's try and make it as equitable as possible, and that includes making sure there are roads where they need to be, based perhaps less on electoral boundaries and more on need.
Catherine Greiner, Susan Templeman and Zali Steggall are here. Zali, the independent MP for Warringah, Susan, the Labor MP for Macquarie, and Catherine Greiner, a former City of Sydney councillor. Now, cost of living pressures continue to intensify with a further rate rise, of course, and the promise of more to come. What are you seeing of those pressures in your part of Sydney? And what are the pressure on the Reserve Bank Governor? Does it risk the independence of the Reserve the way everyone seems to be open season on Philip Lowe at the moment? Susan Templeman.
Well, I'm certainly seeing cost of living pressures and as the Labor government, we've been very clear that a lot of what we're doing is trying to relieve that through cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines. There'll be things in the budget to directly help people with energy. But think about my area. I've got people who have quite extreme weather. So really hot in summer in some parts of it, really cold in winter. And so the electricity bills that go with that, or the gas bills that go with heating, are really hurting. And we're seeing a really challenging retail and hospitality market. It's been that way since the 2019-20 bushfires, and everyone I talk to says it's just not consistent spending. People aren't consistently heading out. And so our local economy is really continuing to feel it. I think, so do they want someone to blame? I think they do want someone to blame. My view is that the Reserve Bank needs to operate independently. But of course, we are looking at the terms that it's given, and the review of that is something I think will be of great interest to a lot of people.
I mean, some people say we're just relying too much on monetary policy, not enough on fiscal policy, in a way that, we didn't 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, and look, I'm not an economist, so I really hate to suddenly become an instant expert on it. But when you look at how interest rates have operated for the last few years, they haven't necessarily had the same impact that those levers had way back when I remember people paying 17% interest rates. it does seem that there are a whole lot of more complex factors. And for us, it's about, we've got supply problems that are causing prices to go up. So we've got to, let's address that underlying issue of the supply of things. Let's address the underlying issue of skilled workers. So there's a number of things that we'll be doing to provide relief and be responsible, but we do really recognise how much people are hurting.
Zalia, I love talking to local MPs about these sort of things because you see people in your offices, don't you? You see them at the train station. What are people telling you?
Oh, absolutely. Cost of living concerns are huge. I mean, an area like Warringah where we've had phenomenal house price rises, which also then obviously leads to rental affordability issues. And no matter the demographics of areas, I think food insecurity is very real when cost of living pressures are on. I should say with some of the discussion, though, I am very mindful of it's very dangerous of the executive to be too critical of the Reserve Bank. I see it as a little bit like criticism of the judiciary, where you can never raise questions or put at risk the public's confidence in the institution for the role it plays. But with saying that, it's really important for the Governor and the Reserve Bank to provide really good explanations and reasons for decisions, and much better, I think, indications of factors that are going to influence their decisions and where rates are likely to go. Very much like a judge when handing down a judgment, you need really clear reasons to justify the decision. And I think that's where there's a little bit of criticism at the moment, and I think I'd like to see better. But could I say there is an alternative option, is why isn't, for example, the government could be looking at increasing or incentivising more superannuation contribution, because then at least Australians would be putting money into their future rather than big banks making more money off the mortgages.
There was a really interesting piece on the ABC website by one of our business reporters talking about an essay that Keynes wrote back in, I think, 1930, talking about enforced saving and saying the best way to do all this stuff is not to put the interest rates up and down, but to change the savings rate. So you can either do that through superannuation or you can do it through people's bank accounts. But you actually have enforced saving during times when the economy is overheating, and then give the people the money back when the economy is in trouble, or at least let them leave it to their retirement. And at least that means that this extra money is not going to the bank; it's going to yourself in a deferred way.
Oh, absolutely. I would really like to see the Treasurer engage with that kind of policy to not see record profits by the big banks by collecting yet more of Australian households, but in fact to be looking at that investment into our future, whether it is through savings or superannuation. We know that system works, it's effective, and it does mean that they are deflationary measures there definitely are other measures, and I think we get a little stuck into just continuing to do things one way, and it's time to be a little bit more maybe agile in policy to look at these challenges.
Catherine Greiner, the main problem seems to be this method that we're using, which is interest rates. All the burden falls on about a third of households, and the other 2/3 of households, either because they're renting or because they're paid off their house, they're not affected by this spending pressure at all. So they're keeping ongoing spending, which means the Reserve Bank then needs to hit that third of the household even harder to stop the spending.
Yeah. Look, there's an element of me that says, let's get a grip here, folks. Anybody, the millennials have only known 0 to 1% interest rates. I mean, get a grip on reality. That's completely unsustainable. And whereas what I saw in my time, with young children and a house and a great mortgage and all the rest of it that everybody has at that stage of their life, they were interest rates of anywhere between 5 and 8 to 9%.
Or 17 at one point, but
that was unusual. Now, that's the other end of that spectrum. But
whether it was 8% or 17%, the sum you'd borrowed was maybe 50,000 or 80,000. It wasn't
500,000.
800,000.
Right. Yes, exactly. So there is that. I understand that differential, but I think the financial literacy in this country, generally speaking, is very poor. Most of the kids who've gone out there and borrowed money to get into their first home, thinking, it's a 1% interest rate, may well not have had understood, well, what do the numbers look like when it goes to 3 to 4 to 5? So I think there's that part.
But if you'd looked at those numbers, it would be impossible for almost anyone to buy a house, right?
Well, you'd have to just know what you were doing. Now, I live in Paddington. Have I seen any pressures in my part of Sydney, not on your life. The millennials are still in the cafes. We didn't have cafes. We didn't have cafes in Warringah. Literally, there was not a cafe. There was a train station and the small shops. I don't think we had a restaurant.
This is the avocado argument, right?
This is the avocado argument. Yeah. So, it's but your point is more valid, though, that the percentage of borrowings on your home now is so much greater. Added to that, the tail end of the COVID effect of products and manufacturing goods not being able to get here.
The supply problem, yeah.
Supply problem is another one. But I think like all of us here, I think we're very nervous about this attack that we're seeing on the Reserve Bank governor. The Reserve Bank must and always should be independent of government. And if the Treasurer isn't articulating his goals to the governor, then the two of them should sit down and I'll buy them a cup of coffee in Paddington.
Now, before we move on, Susan or Zali, I can't see you in Canberra, so do you want to come back on that or...?
I think it's interesting hearing this who had it toughest, argument that goes out. And I've got a daughter, I've got a son and daughter in their late 20s, early 30s, and just looking at the struggle they have to pay the rent and save a deposit with salaries that haven't really seen much uplift in the last, we've had stagnation of wages. I think it's really tough now for young people and with the price increases we saw throughout COVID, particularly in the Blue Mountains. A lot of people went, hey, it's time to get out of the city. So, look, my heart goes out to young people who are trying to do it.
It is very tough on young people. There's no doubt about that, and it's much tougher than it was. The only thing I partly agree with Catherine about is, you hear some people saying it was easy for you, and I just don't think it was, unless you're born incredibly wealthy, it was never easy to buy a house in Australia. You always had to scrimp and save, and you always had to borrow the mattress from Auntie Sally or something.
Look, I agree. Second-hand furniture. My house, we built a house in the Blue Mountains. I think we borrowed a whole $180,000 back in 1990, which seems like such a pittance now. But that was a stretch. We made do with a car. But it's still, our ongoing costs weren't as bad. We didn't have internet. Our electricity was more manageable. It feels like a different scenario. Mm-hmm. And no, it wasn't easy. Yeah. But I really do feel for what young people are facing now. And I feel for what women of my age, nearly 60, who are trying to restart their lives after a divorce or separation. I really feel for them trying to get by and own a home in these sorts of environments.
Yeah, Richard, I think I'll go to bat for the millennials and Gen Z. Yes, it's always been hard and you do have to save to own a house, but we're talking about generations that have difficulty finding rental accommodation, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can't afford rents, let alone looking at buying, because the obvious consequence of rates going up is rents go up, right? These two are not separate. So the pain of raising the rates impacts all generations, because also we often then don't see translated to interest rates for savings accounts don't generally go up commensurately with what interest rates do. So then retirees don't really get recouped either. So generally, I think it probably is that regulation side of how banks set interest rates and how it all operates and the kind of profits that are made. So, look, I'm a bit nervous though, Catherine, about just throwing it to the younger generation and just saying it wasn't that much. It was harder for us before. I think it is hard for all generations, and we just have to recognise at the moment our house prices have gone just stratospheric, right? They're in the millions of dollars now for basic entry level for homes. It is just becoming prohibitively expensive. That dream of a house or at least a long-term rental is just so difficult now in Australia.
Yeah. Zali Steggall is with us, Independent for Warringah, Susan Templeman, Labor for Macquarie, Catherine Greiner, former City of Sydney councillor. It's currently 6 minutes to 6 here on ABC Radio Sydney. Now, tomorrow is not just Valentine's Day, it's also Library Lovers Day. So here's my question. What was the library, private or public, in which you fell in love with books? I know, Susan, you've got a lovely library, both old and new, in Katoomba. I don't know if that was the one that did it for you, but where was it?
Well, it was long before I moved to the Blue Mountains. I had my own library when I was about 9 or 10. I had a Dewey Decimal System happening. I had bookcases everywhere. And I just adored spending time in my own bedroom with my own books, which I would buy secondhand. So, I lived on the North Shore, but I'd catch the train to Chatswood. Anyone who's my generation will remember the White Elephant store at Chatswood near the station. Mm-hmm. And on a Saturday morning, I'd go there, I'd pick up more books, I'd bring them home, I'd cover them in plastic. I just was a real book nerd, if you haven't worked that out.
But doing the Dewey system, that's just fantastic. Well, how did you come up with that?
Well, I looked at what real libraries had and went, well, I can do that too. Yeah, loved it. Loved having all my books in alphabetical order. People now look at my very messy bookshelf and say, oh my gosh, you used to be so organised. And I go, yeah, well, life's moved on a bit.
So, some people just put them in colour code them, the yellows
Never.
together.
No, never. I'm not a colour code person, and I like my non-fiction separate from my fiction. Thank you very much.
And the historical in the order of their, time or,
No, I like those alphabetical. Mind you, I put my ancient Egypt ones, I used to have all my ancient Egypt ones together, my ancient Rome. But of course, when my house burnt down, I lost all these 50 years of book collection. So my current collection is, a lot of it's on Kindle, and it's a much more modest collection of real books.
So they all got burnt in the fire.
Yeah, when we lost the house in 2013, I had a lot of bookcases, and the only thing that survived were a few burnt pages of a book. I can't even tell you which book it was. It was a non-fiction book, but I've kept them because it was bizarre that in the ashes, here were just a few, they're probably 10 centimetre across circle sort of bits of pages.
It was probably Samuel Pepys' account of the fire of London, was it?
Indeed, could have been.
Well, Richard, when we speak of libraries, I think we need to recognise the skills that are getting lost in the librarians and the people working in those institutions. In this day and age of social media and everything being online, people expect it all at the press of a button, a quick Google search, whereas that skill of retaining the knowledge and the expertise of librarians is amazing. So I will use out this opportunity, though, to do a big thank you and shout out to the library staff here in Parliament House. As you well know, with our staffing issues with the Prime Minister, that we heavily rely on the staff of the Parliamentary Library, and they are fantastic.
And the Dewey system is great because you go to find one book and something which you don't know about is next door to it. It's fantastic.
Exactly right.
Catherine, what's your library?
The Mitchell Library. When I was studying at university, it was where I met my husband and fell in love with him. And so I just loved that library. And in those days, it was quite different to what it is now.
What were you studying? Why were you there?
I was there for sociology and social work, psychology. But for that very reason, that you could find books. But I want to do a shout out to librarians now who are creating great communities in their libraries. And these are the focal points for a whole lot of people to come and learn about digital technology and use their emails and so on. It's a great way of bringing the community together.
It's much more than books. And if you haven't explored your local library, if you got an image of it from years ago, go and have a look. It's a different
they're
place.
Amazing. They're amazing.
They sure are. We are out of time, but Zali, thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
Zali Steggall, Independent MP for Warringah. Susan, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Susan Templeman, Labor MP for Macquarie, when she's not putting the Dewey system on her book collection. And board member and former City of Sydney Councillor Catherine Greiner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
We're rolling up to news.
Sally.
We're rolling up to news time here on ABC Radio Sydney. Coming up, a second inquiry into Kathleen Folbig's convictions has resumed with a whole lot of new evidence. It's particularly on those diary entries. You might remember those from the first inquiry. It was said that they were absolutely, some people said they proved her guilt in the murder of her 4 children. Not so, say a whole series of experts who we'll be hearing from in the coming days. They say that, as psychologists, they say these are signs of maternal maternal grief more than guilt. We'll talk to our court reporter, Jamel Wells, about that straight after the news at 6. 22 degrees in the city at the moment, 21 in Camden, 22 in Gosford, 16 in Mount Boyce, 23 in Penrith and 22 in Cronulla. Only one problem on the roads. It's a Prospect, the Great Western Highway. Just past Prospect Highway, a truck breakdown with 1 of 3 westbound lanes closed. That's the latest. News now on ABC Radio Sydney. It's 6 o'clock.